on Friday with.
Hello, objective personality enthusiasts. So, here to do another SI Lab episode with my co-host Brian. And we have two guests today. We have Habib Khan and we also have Jason Ward. And both of our guests are going to be talking about the typing process. And specifically, we're going to emphasize spotting the SI function when typing people. So I'll have Habib and Jason introduce themselves. When you make the introduction, tell us about your OPS type, what got you into OPS, maybe what got you interested in typing celebrities, and just anything else pertinent you want to add.
Yeah, sounds good. I can start with the introduction. Yeah, so my name is Habib Khan, and I am an ESFP jumper, which is double masculine, SeTe, play, consume, sleep, blast, last, and also social one. That's another story. I got into typing because of, I was trying to do some self-growth, just understanding myself and how to improve in things like business and such things. And then when I came across Dave's channel through a friend, Dave and Chan, I thought everything really clicked for me. Like their language really spoke to me and what I've already understood from the thousands of people I've talked to. And I'm like, wait, this is explaining things a little too well. It's like when you read like something on WebMD and it's like, oh, I have it. It's like, it felt a little bit like that, but it felt actually more legit, and it's like, wait, this is actually tracking with reality as you're looking at the patterns. And so something I'm doing now is like, I have a YouTube channel, Personality Habits, and I'm also doing typing and coaching, and my typing stats are at least about 80% these days. Hopefully I'll continue to improve, and yeah, that's me.
Okay, that's cool. So I'm a standard ESTJ. I'm MF, blast, play, sleep, consume. And I got into OP around April 2022. And I was looking at the 16 Personalities website. A friend of mine, someone I knew, introduced me to that. So yeah, I sort of kind of dug into that, and I went on a huge binge of YouTube videos about all sorts of different things, learning the functions. Well, the functions came to me a bit later, and then eventually I came to Dave's channel. I was like, oh, this is not Dave's channel. It's Objective Personality. I never knew Dave's old channel. And they just encompassed all the stuff, Shan and Dave, and I enjoyed watching the dynamic between them. Videos were super fun, and wow, it took me quite a while, and then I discovered Augmented Personalities channel, and I was digging through all those videos, and then I was like, oh, they do typing, so I got a bit of typing from them, and I got typed as ST. Like apparently I'm just obviously ST, and eventually I found the Objective Personality website. Like I don't know how I didn't find that, but anyway, I eventually got to that site, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Now I can watch all the Dave and Shane videos because it's so much fun. And I did not watch all the videos, but I watched enough, and yeah, it's been kind of cool. And then I've been joining in the weekly typing thing, and that's kind of fun. Like it's introducing me to a lot of new ideas, new people, and there's some people out there that I've never would have found, and I've learned a lot of some cool life lessons and ideas from, which I find is quite fun. And yeah, it's kind of cool having the competition as well. I like to compete, so it's kind of fun to see how well I'm doing, although we're getting there. Growth mindset, bit by bit, improving. And that's me.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, thank you. So we'd like to go into kind of more in depth about the philosophy that each of you have when you're typing people. So kind of like what your approach is to typing, what challenges you face, how you get better, maybe what coins you struggle with, but most importantly, how you're spotting SI and maybe some of the challenges or words of wisdom you have when spotting SI in people. So Who would like to start?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so like I can cover the philosophy. I think we're gonna get into the SI stuff for the majority of the episode.
Mhm.
But yeah, just to cover the philosophical aspect of it. For me, I've spent a lot of time, probably well over at least 1,000 hours, or probably more, 2,000 or something, with typing and stuff. So why is it? So you don't want to dive into this stuff without having a goal in mind or a vision or a purpose. So for me, it is like about learning about myself and how I'm aligning with others, and then for like business objectives or personal objectives and growth and stuff, and um, yeah, things like that. And so just knowing where you are in life and positioning that with the typing game. And then as far as the typing game itself goes, you want to improve your process over time. So it's about having multiple iterations. Like I know my stats and I know my numbers, but that's besides the point. The idea is to have a process and to understand your process, your checklist, and go back to it, refer to it, update your definitions for things. It's like you can get as much as you can from a value perspective out of David Chan's videos or other people's videos. But at the end of the day, you need to own your understanding, your process, your checklist. And so that can only be done multiple iterations over time. And then you want to reflect back, and this could be an energy dominant thing that I do, which is like, hey, what's going on in my life? Like, how is me typing this week going to help, you know, in my actual life of like, I'm seeing someone who's organized above gather, and then in my actual life, I'm struggling to come up with a plan for a business meeting or something. And it's like, wait, was I on time? Was I doing that? And then it brings up all these insecurities. So I might be watching someone who's very good at planning, and then I myself in my own life, like even if I had SI, I'd be like, wow, I'm really struggling with this, but this person has it together. And so all those fears and things just come to the surface. And so that's what the typing game really is about at that next level, which is
Mhm.
the kind of hero's journey aspect of it. And so there are both sides of it, and allow yourself to engage with both the typing game as well as your life.
Mhm. Yeah, so I guess regarding the hero's journey aspect, I mean that's kind of interesting. Like when you're watching these celebrities, um, I guess what are some of the greatest insights that you've gotten from the people that you've typed that you've been able to apply to your own journey?
Yeah, one of them for me is David Goggins. Like he got typed as a social one. And for him, it's such a, story of like, who do you resonate with, or who can you can learn from anyone. But for me right now, like I'm thinking about David Goggins and how he owned his story. He wrote two books. The first one, he was going over his own story, and it was very brave of him to do so and like to share all his traumas and how he went over it. And he's sleep last. So for him to do a sleep story is really hard, and he's able to talk through all these difficult challenges that he's overcome and kind of developed an armored mind and all that. But then in the second book that he releases, he actually talks to his mother, where his mom is inspired by him in the first book, and she goes through her trauma. And so you're basically seeing two individuals like able to go through their life and really understand things at a deeper level from a hero's journey perspective of they're like, whoa, like I can do, there's more left in the tank, there's more, there's just and they're able to own their life at that next level. And that's what it's really about
Yeah,
for me. And yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
kind of interesting you say David Goggins because I mean he's just so inspirational. But I think especially if you share the same savior functions as he does, you kind of relate yourself to him and
Yeah, and just to say about that is like it's for him to do the thing that's hardest. Like if you see his type and you see what he's doing, also Gary V, if you see what they're doing, it's the hardest thing for them. And you know it, and you can have a lot more empathy. It was like, whoa, the reason why these guys have this like next level charisma is because they're not afraid of anything. Or they're really harnessing that fear. It's not that they're not afraid, it's that they're using it. They learn how to use their fear for them, their darkness for them.
Mhm.
Where like if you talk crap about David Goggins, he's going to use that as fuel. And that's powerful. And
Mhm.
that's what I want to be able to do. And so then you have no excuses. And if problems that come up in your life, they end up as fuel rather than as issues. But yeah, just knowing the 512 or knowing the person's type, it helps you have that empathy for them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the second thing I wanted to ask is, like, when you're trying to type these different people, do you ever gain more insights to yourself? Does it help your self understanding? Because you're kind of, do you compare yourself to them? And so I guess, do you get more clarification on your own parts of your type by watching other people when you know their type?
Yeah, for sure. It comes down to, like, for example, I'm tribe above self, and just seeing people who are self above tribe and understanding that they're not selfish, that they're actually just building up their own identity. They are the hero in their story, and they're actually living up to their standards. And that takes courage and guts and bravery to consistently do. Like, we just studied Lil Wayne, and someone who has SI is Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And just seeing him follow his process, he's able to explore all these like NE possibilities in movies and stuff, but he has SI. And because he has a process that he can come back to and really understand the history of things, and he's really able to own himself. And so I can see that for me is just seeing how they're owning their saviors in order to do their demons. That's what I'm able to take away from it. Yeah.
Great. Okay, Jason, anything you want to mention about philosophy of typing people?
Yeah. So it's been kind of interesting. As I say, like it has been showing me different people, and what I find very fascinating to contrast is once you do have their type, you start to see when they're sharing ideas that they have figured out or things that they've worked out, and their life lessons, so to speak. Like obviously I'm just doing blast and crack, so I'm like, what is the lessons from all the different people? And it's fascinating to see, like, okay, well, this is this type, and this is the kind of lessons they've produced. And like Dave does talk a lot about there's no free will, or it's like the free will's reduced down to a bunch. But I mean, every now and then you do get to see someone who's sort of discovering something that's not part of their saviors. But most of them are like, my saviors taught me this, and my saviors are saying that. Like Jordan Peterson's always talking about truth. Now, maybe he arrived at that conclusion from many different places, and it is just a good conclusion, but he's also a thinker. And so the thinkers are like truth, 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 truth. Um, but it is interesting to see different people. Like at the moment, I'm looking a bit into Byron Katie, and there are people. It's lovely to be able to see people who are typed and go listen to them, especially the ones who've really struggled. And I find sometimes the selection process is a bit random, like but there are some really stellar cases where we're studying someone who is really inspirational, and we learn quite a lot from them. So yeah, that's kind of my philosophy behind it, is that I'm meeting all these different people and I'm also playing a game when I'm doing it. And so I like to record bits and pieces, and I'm like, oh, that was weird. That was weird. So I'm like, just gonna say that they said this, then they said that, and then they said this. And then trying to contrast all that together to understand the person, because the typology feels rather holistic in a sense, but there's a method to that madness, and it's trying to dig into that NI and see exactly what's going on there. And then it's a bit challenging. So the way I'm also justifying the use of time to myself is that I'm improving my ability to do NI.
So can you explain a little bit more about that digging into the NI? Because you'd be coming at it from your SI. So how do you simulate NI? Because that's a challenge that I have myself, is trying to do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, a really good definition that I got from Rose V. She made a really good set of videos. And in some of her videos, she talks about how NI is clumping a bunch of sensory, and SI it's a whole bunch of sensory, and it can spew off in any direction for many different things. So NI wants to envelop, make like a cone over things. And so roughly, like the image I like to use is you get a cube with its many sides, on all the vertices are enveloped by one NI. And SI and NE is a blank page, and you can start drawing on that page. And as you're drawing, you're like, is that a tree? Is that a fence? I don't know. And as you keep drawing, it's like, oh, it's broccoli. And then no, you keep drawing, and it's like, oh no, it's a big picture. And like until you flesh out all the details, you don't quite know what you're looking at. And if you've left out a few details, you can start randomly guessing. So now, what happens when trying to use NI in this with these ideas in mind is that because I'm trying to write down bits and pieces, like they said this, then they said this, they dealt with this, here was maybe a spike. And as you take all those pieces, you try and tie all of those things together and clump them into the type. And when you're able to clump them into the type and say, they behaved that way, they had this question, they answered like that, and they responded like this, and then this really hurt them, or they pretended to be hurt about that, they kept talking about that, but like, yeah, it just seemed like it's something they're willing to talk about. It's often the stuff people are not willing to talk about is the demons. And just trying to put the whole story together, because NR feels like it's this one story, trying to figure out that. So that's often why you see the NR people are like, this was my path, and they're like dead on that one path, and they're like completely stuck on it. Yeah, it's narrowed down into one story, and it's trying to put it all into a single story.
Like kind of like that analogy that Dave and Shannon use, their life pile.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of what it is. What is their life pile, and not just what they maybe did and said that one time, but what are they doing throughout their whole life? And what's the overarching pattern?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that's quite fascinating. Having in this modern world where we've got access to technology, where we can just sit and watch people like a fly on the wall, watch all their different interviews and sort of get an idea who they are. And if you've got someone who's willing to put in the time and develop a system like Dave and Shannon have, then then we get something like OP, which is kind of wild if you think about it. It's quite interesting. So I mean, even in my own life, I can see many situations where my default program is to do blah blah blah, and it's like, figure it out yourself, dude. Stop asking the people, figure it out yourself. And it's kind of tough. It doesn't feel natural. But you got to push through resistance.
Yeah, I guess Jason, I came with the term consume cheat. There's always we're both consume demons, and there's always the temptation to go to the blast and play and hear everybody else's, and then learn by talking and absorbing. But sometimes you gotta muscle up and open up the content on your own and try to learn without consume cheating.
Yeah.
Because
what Habib has said about really owning your own understanding and doing multiple iterations. I mean, that's kind of consume in my mind. You're just taking all this in for yourself, and you're owning it. It's not going to somebody else. It's kind of making the understanding your own. And sometimes that's something I struggle with because it's like, well, how do I know that my own understanding is even right? I mean, it's kind of like, well, I got to check with people to make sure I'm on the right track.
Yeah, it's kind of an extension of DJism, right? Validation of concepts, not just of yourself. And so there's this propensity to just outwardly, interact with folks, and it's a necessity of the brain to process that way. Folks that don't operate that way might be a little puzzled. Why are you doing that? Just go inside and consume and sleep and figure it out. And it just doesn't come natural for us.
Yeah, from what it sounds like,
typing and OPS in general are very exemplary of that challenge for an EJ, or at least myself.
Yeah. It seems like with this consume cheating, it does seem like when you're engaging with other people, you're using those little blips of like, let's say we're misunderstanding each other, that becomes a new opportunity. Or let's say someone refers to like, oh, I talk about, let's say, Dr. Caroline Leaf, who's SI, you know, it's like, oh, now that's an opportunity to consume that person. It's like, because then we could talk about her, right? And so it's a good way, however you get to it, because when you're talking to other people, you get to feel like you can process your own story that way. And also the whole point of consume is that so the next time you show up to the conversation, you have something to bring. You're not just bringing this empty gift basket of, you know, stuff that, you know, doesn't really, it isn't really personal.
That's exactly right. And even like in voice chats or personal one-on-one conversations, that this cheating propensity, you know, we learn when we talk. And when we shut up, we might not be learning nearly at the clip. So I find when I'm talking to folks outwardly, out and doing this consume cheating, the learning curve is way higher, right? So it just goes to show you how we're all wired differently, and philosophically how we can learn and pass on information to others and share it, and etc. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So Laura, before we segue to me kind of asking some SI specific questions here, let me ask you your philosophy. We asked Jason and Habib, but what's your overarching philosophy of typing?
To not make it an embarrassment to myself.
Yeah, that's my philosophy.
Yeah. I guess I haven't sleep processed that question
Okay.
enough, but I feel like I kind of need to simulate the way Dave and Shannon think about it, because it's kind of like they're the ones doing the typing. So how do I get closest to Dave and Shannon? How do they think about it? And I know that maybe that's not the best way to approach it, because I'm kind of relying on their understanding, and I'm not making it my own understanding necessarily. Because what I found is, I mean, I've tried different approaches, but I never feel like I get consistent success at it. So then it's like, well, maybe this is not a good approach. So I drop that approach, and maybe I'm not sticking to that approach long enough to see real effort. Because at first it'd be like, oh, you just go down the checklist. Okay, here's Dave and Chan's checklist, and so I would try that approach, but then sometimes I get thrown for a curveball because it's like they did something on this side of the checklist, but they were not that coin. So how do I fit that in? And then I would take the approach of, what are they doing most often? It was almost like I would have a tick mark. Okay, if they do a sensing thing, a tick mark under S, if they do a thinking thing, a tick mark under T. But then sometimes I would misinterpret if they were doing it in a savior or a demon state. So
yeah, it's fascinating. And I'm noticing you and Jason are both kind of like discretizing, proceduralizing things, and Habib is talking more big picture.
and I know, because I know for me, like, I can get hung up on a word or detail. Well, like, they said this, yeah, and and my brain just naturally wants to say, okay, well, that corresponds to sensing, because they're talking about organizing physical things. Well, anybody could organize physical things, and then it's like, you got to look like, are they doing it in a savior demon state? Is this typical of their overall life pattern or not? And it's always, I feel like I'm always having to step back and kind of like pull myself back and detach myself from that, and
yeah, I had a little bit to that.
It takes a lot of effort on my part to do that, because it's not what I'm naturally inclined to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll pipe in a little bit here, because I'm really not worthy. I've typed probably about 12 times since last year sometimes.
Yeah.
I had one streak where I was going and I was doing like my philosophy was I'm not going to be able to do the discrete stuff because I haven't consumed enough. I don't know the methodologies enough. Like Jason, he'll talk to us a little bit about this, but he's done a lot of really great SI-like approach work, and I haven't done the work. So I said, you know what? It's an NI game. It's an intuitional game. So I had 6 weeks in a row where I got 3 coins or less by spending less than like 10 or 15 minutes entirety. I was just like shooting
It was amazing.
into the hip. I'm like, this is an intuitive game. I'm going to take my SI and throw that crap to the curb and then only bring it back into the equation as is necessary to allow myself to do good. And then, dummy as I am, I decided to abort that process, and I started SIing the heck out of it, and my stats went to crap. So, and then I quit typing because I suck. But when I resume it, I'm going to have to find some kind of middle ground on that. So that's my philosophy.
Same here. I've been kind of not very consistent in my typing efforts. I used to be more consistent, and for a while, like maybe about a year ago, most weeks I type or attempt to type, but now lately sometimes I'll go several weeks in a row and I'm not submitting a guess, or I might watch 10 to 20 minutes and I'm like, oh, I don't have enough information. I don't know. It's not worth putting down a guess because I can't really narrow much of anything down. And I guess it kind of leads me to my next question is, how do you keep your confidence up? Because I'm sure you have good weeks, you have bad weeks, and maybe you have a little, I suppose, just like baseball players, you probably have slumps every now and then. And how do you pull yourself out of that?
Yeah.
Habib, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first on like the slumps whole thing. But right before I do, I will say the whole thing I was talking about with iteration, you want to iterate not only on your typing process, but also on your philosophy. So Laura, like take it as a hint today where, you're asked that question. So like maybe after this or over the next week or so, like come up with your best answer at this time of like, what is your philosophy? So that's something to work on consistently. My philosophy is going to evolve over time. Like, yeah, so that's one thing. But yeah, on the forgiving yourself or having bad results or whatever, or judging yourself on the results in the first place. It's this whole thing of like the Zen. So one of the good takeaways of the Zen thing is when you're having a good day, just calm yourself down. If you can be grateful for just nothing on a good day, be like, oh, I got good results, but I don't care. If you take the compliment, then you also have to feel bad when you screw up. So if you find your good days or someone's giving you a compliment or, it's like, hey, you're doing great on this. If you just don't take that, then you also start to deal with the negative in a better way. And so when it comes to me, like I've gotten like 5 12s right or 1 coin off or whatever, like I've gotten good results. And what I tell myself is, hey, no ego boost from this, because if I choose to take the ego boost now, then I'll get pain later when I am like whatever 4 coins off or something or something like that, and whatever my judgment is on that. And because there are those days, there are those weeks, right, where you do fumble the ball of like, oh, this person looked exactly like that person or whatever. And it's, I remember there was someone, Rana El Kalyubi. That was one that I royally messed up because it looked like someone who was sleep, consume, play. And she turned out to be consume, play, blast. She looked like
that one. I really messed up on that one too. That one
had like the sleepy eyes. Sometimes the sleep blast people have sleepy eyes. And it's just like, oh, like what happened? Did you sleep too much or not enough? Like you can't tell. And so that's like an anecdote kind of thing of like, hey, like really. But yeah, it's so just on judging yourself, like don't judge the results, judge your process. Did I do it? And it's funny. The answer is SI. It is probably a combination of the SI and the NI and like everything, but like just judge yourself on, did I stick to my process? Did I show up today? Did I do my best? Yeah.
That's some really fantastic insight.
Yeah, because I know another thing for me is I'm always comparing myself to other people, and so it's like, like it seems like all these people are better than me, and how is it that all these people were getting it right and so close and I'm so far off, and then sometimes I'll get kind of, honestly, I'll get kind of discouraged by that, and then it's like I don't want to participate if I don't think I can do well. So I mean, I guess, how do you overcome that? Do you just not look at other people's guesses maybe, and then you don't know? I mean,
Yeah,
it's like he's
comparison.
saying, just don't ride the
go ahead.
success failure roller coaster. Try to stay even keel is what I heard him saying. And well, that's some great counsel. Because you're gonna have rough days. You're gonna have several weeks in a row where you screw the pooch and it's just terrible, right? But recover.
So there's a thought experiment. Imagine everyone else's typing records were 100%, just 100%, and you're chilling at like 60 or 70%.
Yeah.
And you're like, is there a point of me doing this if everyone else is so much better than me? Like, even if you run that thought experiment, it's like, no, actually, I still get value from showing up and going at this every day. And by the way, like, if you play the game long enough, I notice I learn the most from my failures. If I get everything right, I learn nothing. I learn nothing when I get everything right, because it's like, all right, sure, I already knew it. I already knew that, right? But if you're having bad results, it's actually such a greater opportunity for you to learn. Because a person who's getting 100%, they have nothing to learn. What are you doing here? Just showing off? Like, what the hell's the point? What's the point of you being here? It's it's okay. There is a point for them too, but that's a different story. But yeah, for you, it's like, find that even if everyone is doing well, like, it still matters that you show up.
Yeah, I think that's really good point, because you're right, because there's stuff to learn, and I guess I'm kind of starting to develop a philosophy, okay, I'm demon sleep, I'm processing as I'm going here, but kind of like this typing people, like kind of like a learning experience, like here's some new, because oftentimes it's some new person that I'm not familiar with, or I am, but just on a very surface level. Like, I get to delve deep into this, and I get to understand something better, and maybe I can learn some tips from their lives that I could apply to my own life to improve it. So I think there's that part of it too, and kind of making that my philosophy, kind of like, I'm just going to learn about somebody new, and try to understand people better, and maybe get some tips for myself, but rather than trying so much as, okay, how close can I get to 512, and I got to get as many coins right as possible, and
almost makes me wonder, like, with your Enneagram and those types of things matter too. If you're a 3, I'm a 3. Maybe that's why I've kind of like abandoned typing, because my performance and my achievement sucked. But I just wonder, those factors are certainly under the hood of your psychology as well.
Yeah. Well, Enneagrammer typed me as a 5 wing 6. So, and type 5 is a competency type. So they do want to feel like a sense of mastery for what they do, and to feel like they understand.
That makes a lot of sense. A 3 and a 5 would probably be most like that. It's my guess. How about you, Jason?
This is like my favorite topic in the world. Yeah, so I have a bunch of values that I'm gonna expunge on. So it's like, this is my masculine FR coming out. So if things get a bit like heavy, just give me a tap on the shoulder. But essentially, I believe that you have to be a fool. You have to learn to be a fool, and you have to learn to be happy with it. And it's very important that you do that. And essentially what that allows you to do is it lets you make mistakes. And it lets you make mistakes without feeling bad about it. Because if you're able to make mistakes, you're able to grow more. And so the biggest mistake is not making a mistake. It's like choosing the safe route all the time and never pushing the boundaries. And so when you do push the boundaries, you're going to make mistakes. And then what's important as well is, while you're doing this, it's the mind is tempting. Like, you got a resistance within your mind to measure things, because your mind doesn't want to look at your mistakes. And so when you do record your mistakes, you start measuring, you take measuring points as you go through it. and then you can start to learn things. So what gets measured gets managed. And so if you're not measuring it, you're not managing your mistakes and your failures, and you're not going to get that incremental improvement. And to truly absorb growth mindset into your bones is to understand that not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet. Every single time you take a measurement point and it's wrong, you go, not yet. That's the answer. It's not yet. It's not it's wrong, it's not yet.
Mhm.
And so you keep moving along the lines and you're working forward, 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 forward. And because you're willing to be a fool, you're willing to make mistakes, other people can look at you and say, how could you ever say that? And you say, well, I did. With the information I had at the time, that was the answer I was able to spit out. So in other words, if I improve the information I have to work with, I will spit out better results. And now, as you say this, the result is based on the information you were working with. And so what you can also frame that as is, this is my process. My process spits out the results. Now, you can say that this is your personal process, but now are you attached to that process? You shouldn't be. And the idea is your process is more important than your outcome. And that is what it means to truly have process over outcome. And so what's also rather fascinating to digest is the idea that just because you learn something doesn't mean that it's appropriate learning. So you might learn that this thing means this, and then you might learn that this thing could also mean this. And sometimes you're getting false information and false signals. And so it's very important to not be attached to that information that you're learning, because sometimes the things you learn are not actually true. And so you have to keep updating that process over time, all the time.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not yet, because even your process is in a continual state of updates. And so you're never locking in on something and saying, my guess is perfect, my answer's not perfect. You're constantly working on that.
Right.
And what does help a lot to divorce your ego from what you're doing, because the process of the outcome model, like, so I'll give an example of Alex Hormozi. So I got introduced to Alex Hormozi through OP, and he's a 2, but essentially he has some really interesting philosophies. Now he's demon NF, right? But he talks a lot about like, do I deserve the money I'm making? Is it important for me to make the bed and do this in order to achieve these things? And he says, well, isn't the metric that I'm measuring is like, did I do the sales course today? Did I do the things that bring in the money? And so whether he gets the money or not, whether he actually psychologically deserves it or not, is irrelevant, because he's like, this is my process. I keep doing the correct process where I do the right things that produce the money that will eventually work. So I just got to keep doing that. And whether or not I am attached to that process doesn't actually matter. And so this might be my type speaking, where I'm like, don't attach your identity to things. Learn something and keep it separate from you. And you must judiciously choose what you bring into yourself and make a part of you. Because with the things that you make a part of you, that kind of, it brings your ego into play. That it's going to make your brain more resistant to contradictory information. And as long as you can keep your ego out of the picture, you can then bring in information safely and then throw it away. You bring it in and throw it away. And you're not attached to what goes into your box of process. And as you keep spitting out the results, you're also not attached to those results. And so throughout this entire system that's created, you're not attached to anything. And so therefore you can look like a fool to other people, and they can say, oh, you're so stupid for this, you're so stupid for that. And you're just like, that's a ridiculous opinion, because I'm not even attached to those outcomes. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's got nothing to do with about you. And so maybe that's an EJism. It's like, oh, it's not about me. It's about them or whatever. And maybe if you are a fool around other people, it makes them feel all intelligent and smart around you, and then they like you. And it's like, who knows? But yeah, so that's a large part of my philosophy.
It's really good. Yeah.
I'd like to, if I may, kind of wrap up the philosophical part with an acronym, which wouldn't surprise anybody. You know, I've heard some really good things, and the consistency I see there is, one, humility. You know, you reference ego and different things, right? The second one I kind of heard is iteration. And then the third one is PO, process orientation. So HIPPO is the acronym.
So
that kind of summarizes.
Write it down. Humility, iteration,
process orientation.
I love
This is how my brain works. I can't help myself. Jason, come on. He's
like
May I, Brian? May I add that to the OPS glossary?
Absolutely, as long as consume cheat is in there.
Oh, it's there. I put it in there.
I can't help myself, folks.
Well, I don't think it's in David Shan's glossary, but it's in the unofficial, glossary. OPS
Oh,
Hippo it
I
is,
love
right?
you,
That's the
Brian.
typing philosophy: humility, iteration, and process orientation.
Okay. All right. Well, should we change gears a
Yeah.
little bit and just talk about spotting SI when you're typing people?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll kind of maybe lead the interview segment here. And either one of you guys can go first, but I'll tell a little bit of segue into this, philosophically wise, speaking of, is a old machine design professor, probably the best professor I ever had. He always emphasized the role of opposites to us and approach it from the back degree, right? Or the back angle. And then Matthew McConaughey has kind of a philosophy of to understand who you are, first know who you're not, right? And so, in the vein of those two philosophies from folks that I followed or was influenced by, I'd like to approach it this way too and see what kind of antidotes Habib and Jason have, and you as well, Laura, to the equation of going wrong with seeing SI, where you're typing somebody, you were sure you saw SI in them because they made a list or whatever. And are there some episodes and some lessons learned, speaking of humility and iteration and process orientation, that maybe the viewing audience might glean something good out of? I'm gonna pick on Habib first.
Yeah.
Been typing longer.
Sure. Yeah, like I was looking over at my typing stats and which ones did I screw up on one way or the other. And there was John Travolta, who I thought had SI, but he turned out to have NI, right? He's TENI, and I had TESI for him. And it's like when you're able to create a story that I'm able to follow along, I'm like, oh, that's SI. That's got to be sensory. I can follow you. It's like, no, can you really follow them? Are you sure they're not using analogies? Are you sure that the known information, because known information sounds very easy to follow because the person is very confident it's in their box. But just because they're talking from their box doesn't mean it's, SI. It could be an abstract box that you just happen to understand. Like if my NI is locked onto the same thing as John Travolta, then I'm going to be like, oh yeah, it's got to be sensory, but it's not. And so that's one of the anecdotes is like just because someone has a box doesn't mean it's an SI box, and it can sound, just because you can follow along doesn't mean it's sensory.
Yeah,
yeah.
Say something like following along. Like for me, sometimes I'll mistake it for blast. Oh, they have high blast because they're clear and I can follow them. And sometimes they might be blast last. They might be savior ST or maybe masculine S. So it helps with following them in the sensory, but.
Yeah, thinking is quite good too. Like you can follow along someone's like logical blocks, especially, us all being blockheads, it's like if someone has all the blocks in place, it's like, all right, whether it's NT or ST, like you can pretty much follow it. And yeah, even some SF NF people who have their process down, they can really sound like they have it together. But yeah, the SI, the box, the following along, and there are other anecdotes like the SI eyes and lips, and because SI people have thinner lips. We'll see about that.
What are
Yeah,
the SI eyes? I missed that one. I know the SI lips anecdote, but what's the SI eyes?
I'm not too sure.
Not
I think
eyes, huh?
Not
yeah,
eyes.
yeah. I think there's something about them being like closer together or something. I think Anthony O'Neill is used as a good example for them, for the SIIs. I mean, just if you see it, like, I feel like the NIIs are more like, I don't know, kind of like the, like, it can be different. But yeah, the point is that those anecdotes don't necessarily work like you think, like, if you are tracking that, and that's something where I've had to eat my own words, where visual typing does work, actually, if you are playing that game well and tracking your results there, like, but still at the end of the day, like all these anecdotes at some point, you know, you want to know if is it stacking up in your favor. If there's like 10 anecdotes, and like maybe you should listen to it, right? But anecdote typing, it's not completely unusable. But just, you know, kind of be balanced with it. You're kind of playing with fire there. It's kind of like the cheating kind of way, because you still have to prove it in the sensory, in the intuition, in the patterns, in your process. You have to go back to your process and make sure you're doing that, and track your anecdotes, because if you're just ignoring that, like, oh, I think that person has SI eyes, but I'm not going to write that down, then you have the bias in your head. It's still biasing you. You're just not consciously incorporating that part of your process. You do want to write it down and stuff like that. And like, oh, I can follow this person's story. Okay, write that down. Now try to make the person intuitive. You know, try to make this person leave the planet. Okay, then maybe you can catch that John Travolta as NI. You could catch that, you know. And by the way, for Paul Ekman, I think I had him as NI and instead of SI, and he turned out to be SI. And yeah, so that was another one where, you know, you're trying to, like, just because it sounds like an analogy, if they could be NE analogies, he's a double observer, right? And so you want to kind of so there's another lesson to be learned there, and you want to track all that.
So maybe like if you're sure, if you really think that they're this one coin, try to make them the opposite coin and try to make yourself see the opposite coin as best as you can. Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's really good. So Jason, how about yourself? Any war stories? Learn from the rule of opposites, so to speak.
I mean, so I've made a lot of mistakes, and I remember in typing the Rob Delaney class, it was like, this guy keeps talking about things, and every time he's explaining something, he's mentioning this thing and that thing. It's like, it just seems like so much sensory, and it's like, it's just so difficult. And then it turns out he's NE at the top. So that's completely the opposite. And yeah, it's been quite difficult. Like, it's not so easy to see the sensory, because it's like the idea of the S coin is proving. Like, are they proving or are they guessing? And so, like, when someone's demon intuition, they tend to not want to make you guess. So when they're explaining something, they're telling you about all the sensory stuff, and you don't really have to guess. Like, you can follow all the little things that they're saying, and every now and then there might be a little guesswork done here and there. But in general, they're explaining things quite in depth. But that can be a bit tough to see. What I found is a bit easier to do is to prove, do they have NE? Does NE exist? And then you can do the cross-check for SI. Because the SI, they are controlling physical reality, but the curiosity is that SE actually organizes physical reality as well. And it's like, how do you differentiate between organizing something and controlling it? And that's quite a difficult one to like wrap your head around, because they seem so similar, and they can be overlap, but there is some differences. But
so
ultimately, it's easier to look.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but how would you define the differences between controlling and organizing? Because I guess I kind of see them as kind of the same. Don't they all fall under SI? So
might be hitting on an IP versus EJ, isn't there? A little bit.
Oh yeah?
Maybe.
I see. Well, for example, SI is still going to be personal, right? So people are going to organize things their own way. So if they put, if they're building a house and they put light switches somewhere, they're going to put them in their own way that makes sense to them. Whereas SE is going to say, well, this is the standard and we don't want to deviate from that standard. And so SI will be more customized, personalized, and it will, it'll have its own unique flair to it as well. Whereas SE is like, it can be unique. It's just that you're generally going to find that it was seen somewhere else and then seen somewhere else. And this is kind of on the spectrum. The thing is, it's comparing the sensory. And SI is saying that, well, it's different. And SE will also say things are different, you know? So it's like, that is a complicated thing, because you're comparing the sensory. You're going to say, this is different, this is better. And SI is also going to say things are different. And so that's a very difficult, murky territory to get into, because the differences are so nuanced, and even I'm not completely consciously aware of what those differences are. So what I try to do is I say, are they proving? Is it sensory? And then are they OI? So you work out if someone's OE, they're the we, and they want to gather, and they don't want to make the plan. And it is that sort of like, I wasn't allowed to make the plan, so I grabbed onto this person's plan or latched onto that, and it's just there's this not allowed energy behind like making the plan. And I mean, within myself, I found that I have plans for everything, but I tend not to write things down. I tend to just remember it, and I can just make contingency plans. Well, if that happens, then I can do that. If that happens, then I can do that, and all these different things. So what I'm also doing in that situation is I'm doing the demon NE of like anything can happen. It could all happen. Like, and that's not quite what NI is doing. Like you often see people say the EPs with NI at the bottom, they're like talking about ghosts or spirituality or God told me this. And I know Devin Chan said the demons is what we all outsource to God, but NI also tends to be something where it says like, this is my path in life, and it's this one NI. And it's like, for example, with demon NE, it could be like, if I don't brush my teeth, like I could get liver poisoning, or like this could happen, or that could happen. My teeth could fall. Like it's like many, many different things could occur. And yeah, it's just freaking out about like I could just spontaneously combust. And like NR doesn't do that. NR's not looking at that. NE is like, well, you know, if I'm walking across the street and I don't jump over this puddle, like who knows what could happen? Like it could be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be that specific thing. It's just like NE is so expansive on the what could happen, the possibilities. It's abusive with those analogies in that sense as well. And NR isn't quite that. And so it's easier to see the extroverted function. So when you can look at the NE, you can then use that to just say, okay, well then there's SI. Now they're SE first, so SI first or NE first. And then you got to work out, are they proving? Are they making me guess? Can I understand everything that they say? Could I draw it and like follow a step-by-step plan? Or are they making me guess? So with with SE, you're gonna see like if you're looking for the OE, because you'll see like, oh, this person's OE, and then like, and they're proving, then you're gonna say SE. But the thing is as well is that SE is giving you highlights, and it's saying this was here, this was here, then this was compared to that, and it's all these different things, and then it's like it's all basically meaning, and this is what I'm trying to get to. This is the crux of the story. This is what I'm trying to say.
And sometimes I won't catch Savior SE. Like I will think like it's NE, for example, because for me it just seems scattered about, and it doesn't feel like proving to me, because for me proving means it's cohesive, like it's organized, it's more sequential, and then like, well, I have a sensory here, I have a sensory there, and I have a sensory there. How am I supposed to connect all that? You know?
Yeah, I had the same problem, you know, the SC, I mean, you could see OE. Pretty consistently, I could see OE. But SC versus NE seems to be a little bit of a minefield too, you know, talking broad picture typing here. But back on SI's terms of what I'm hearing is, you know, SE versus NI, SI versus SE, and basically the SI NE spine and axis are ways to go right or wrong in typing. And we're kind of covering right now some of the mistakes and stuff, but I guess let's go ahead and pivot to what kind of tips you guys have in terms of success stories and overall tips, triangulation, cross references, whatever.
If I may, just before we do, the other thing SI is doing is talking in a tunnel. And so like I was just doing it right now. I was just talking in a tunnel, and I don't want to move on to the next thing before I get that also. Like SI is doing this tunnel talk, and SE does want to jump right, like Laura is saying. And it's like it doesn't feel like they're proving because they keep moving on to other things. So it's gonna just keep nailing one point down until it's like.
Yeah, I do think it is. Yeah, it is worth going over that axis component, because like SI will look like NI and SI can also look like SE. But generally people are like, okay, SI is not NE. Like if you kind of know what you're doing, like you have to make a few missteps to think of someone who has SI as NE.
Well, but I've had cases where I have mistaken that, and oftentimes it's somebody that maybe they have Savior SI, but they have double activated NE, or the NE is masculine, and then in that case, I could
Good point.
Mhm.
Sure, that possibility does exist, and you did it right there. That's a very SI-NE, situation. For me, the NISE is like looking at. So one thing, the way I look at it is NI is the average case. So this is a concept that I've been thinking about. NI is the average case, right? That's why it's like, hey, it's going to be this way on average. SE is a random case, which is why it seems so NE-like. It's just random. It's like, hey, where'd you bring that out of? It's like, well, that could happen if I cross the street and look at that person the whole time. They're going to be freaked out. Like, it's like that's a random. It's like I randomly thought of that physical scenario in the extroverted world, right? And then, but NE is what I'm seeing is like a best case scenario kind of thinking of like, hey, like, oh, what if it all works out? What if, we get 100,000 people to like, try our product or something. I don't know. And it's like, it's kind of like the rose-colored glasses of like, hey, let's brainstorm this idea, or like, hey, let's do this. And it has an optimistic spin to it. And SI is like, hold up, you crazy people. Like, we need to like narrow down on like what is physically, like, I understand you have all these best case scenarios, but like what's actually like kind of, I think of it as like worst case scenario, but it's kind of like trying to prevent things from getting too wild, getting too scattered. Of like even for this conversation, like Brian, he put together a list. He's like, hey, let's kind of narrow down, and we're all, all three of you were playing the like narrowed down game of like, hey, let's make sure it doesn't get too crazy. Let's but from those parameters, right? When you have those bordered walls, you know where to play, right? So it's SI is great. You actually get more freedom, but I don't need to preach SI to you guys. But but yeah, that's but viewing it on an axis.
Saviors too much.
We need it. We do need it. It's a naturally chaotic world. It is a chaotic world.
Well, okay. So
yeah.
speaking of that, making fun of myself a little
We
bit.
do a fishbowl.
I really honestly do feel like SI and NE are about as close to 50-50 as you can get in my brain, because when you were talking, Habib, I'm like, you're describing my brain. It's like my brain's constantly just all over the place. NE, and SI is always there in the background. I call it bazooka. It's like, okay, buddy, let's distill this down. And I had a conversation with Kim from the community about, I think I might be play first, and no. And everybody quickly discounts that, because at the end of the day, the highest obligation in my brain is to SI things. So anyway, it's just a little bit of an anecdote there, taking off of what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to illustrate this point here where the SI-NE axis is its own thing. You have your own problem at hand where you have the NE possibilities, where it's not like a specific abstract situation you're avoiding. It's multiple. It's like, hey, this might not just screw up that way. There's A to Z on how this can screw up. And to prevent the A to Z on screw up potentials and potentialities, possibilities, you do need that physical control of like, hey, let me look at my, and even for like this interview I did with Dave, like I needed to develop an SI list because this could go anywhere. Like they're kind of, and without SI is like things can really splinter off into a lot of possibilities. Like everyone has to deal with that. And for that reason, we have SI, and that's kind of the axis. Whereas SENI is playing a completely different game, where it's handling multiple situations. I live in New York, so like you go out the street, there's about like 100 different things that could happen physically. There are like a lot of us, so you kind of have to have an abstract control as to like, okay, let me just make sure I have my wallet, phone, and keys or whatever, and it's just the tried and true like kind of abstract control on like how you're going to handle multiple physical possibilities from happening. Like, so that's it's kind of this whole different axis of doing that. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of which, fourth segment is I'm gonna SIS back on track here. and say, hey, what are some of the tips you would give somebody new to typing, each of you, and Laura as well, that says, you know what, here's a surefire way that I've NI'd a process here to identify SI. Either one of you guys, if you've got something like that to offer to the folks watching. And there may not be a surefire way, but something, say a success story or something that you really think is good counsel.
Well, I think the biggest tip is you really can't go by what they say because oftentimes people are speaking out of their liar words. So you really can't just take for granted what people say and slap a type on it. You really have to step back and like what are they actually doing, and what is their life pile, and what state are they in? Are they in a savior state when they say it? Or are they in a demon state?
Yeah, that stage of life part too. I'd like to hear anybody's comment on that too, because I often wonder about that. I'm pretty sure they've shaved me right. I'm comfortable with that, but I'm wondering about 15, 20 years ago if I wasn't truly TENE play first. And even in large parts of my aspects of my life. But as I've grown and matured and had some hard learned lessons, I think it's definitely gone to the TESI as the savior for myself. So I'd be wondering, like, when you're typing somebody and maybe they're in their 40s or 50s like myself versus if they're in their 20s and they're in the VC chat, are there any nuances you've learned through that in terms of peacocking or anything of that variety that might throw you off or that might hone you in?
Yeah, quickly, just to say about the age thing, people in their 20s are usually exploring quite a bit. So if you hear someone in their 20s like talk about stability and 401k, then that kind of narrows things down a bit, of like someone trying to figure out their life path at age like 18, 19, or like, hey, I still haven't figured it out. It's like, what do you mean you still haven't figured it out? Like, why are we talking about this? You got the world is your oyster, like, and so that's one thing to track, is that in different life stages, the general public wants to be this way. And like, some people are like, if all the other kids are politically progressive and this person is centrist, like, yeah, Joe Biden's great, things won't change. It's like, that's going to clue you in for that age bracket. And then as you get older, is a person still a rebel? Is a person like acting out? Okay, so if someone's acting like an EP in their, like a chaos monkey in their 40s, okay, is it because they have a massive insecurity? They're the lead SI or NI person skateboarding, midlife crisis mode? Or is it more like, hey, this person is actually coming into their own, or they've been this way forever and they're actually trying to dial it back? Kind of like those Jackass characters. I forget like what they do their stunts and stuff, and those people, they're trying to dial back the addictions to their gather. But yeah, different life stages, you see where people are at in their journey of like, have they had a lifetime of gathering? Have they had a lifetime of organizing? Being like, oh, I really needed to go out more. Oh, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I should have left the house. I should have taken that new job. I should have, started that business. I should have, left my hometown. I didn't get my passport until I was 45, like, it's, these things are what you want to watch out for. Is like, compared to the rest of the people in that age bracket, what archetype are they playing out?
Yeah.
What are their friends trying to get them to do?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Totally.
So you sounds like you do use that as an intuitive cue or a classified cue for you when you're typing somebody 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It's going to be a different process. Now, granted, most of the celebrities are probably in their 40s, and most of the folks in the community are all over the place, maybe in the 20s, 30s. So, but you do find yourself kind of proceduralizing that mindset as you watch somebody's here.
Yeah, it's becoming more so. Like, it is very different typing a celebrity to like someone, out the womb of the, in their 20s. It's like, oh, what's your fresh programs? It's kind of nice to see that. It's just like, you're going to like a grocery store, it's like before the thing is cooked, right? But you're talking to a 40 or 50-year-old, this person is fully cooked. They're famous for what they're famous for. They've made their decisions. They're at the end of their hero's journey. That's going to look a lot different. But it's kind of nice because if it's exactly where things should be, like people in the community, they're trying to get life lessons so that they can go on their hero's journey. And then we're studying people who have been through it, which is exactly kind of what you want. But just noticing that those two are different scenarios. And it's interesting seeing people, Brian, like yourself, who, you know, you're not in your 20s, right? It's safe to say. And but it's good because you're able to give all those lessons back, and just seeing someone transform and kind of it injects new life into you, being like, oh, so this was my program. Okay, so now like what can I do? Like how can I kind of round myself out? And there are different experiences I can have. There's a different type of life I can choose for myself, and yeah, live more intentionally that way. But yeah, it's good seeing the mix, like a young celebrity or someone not in their 20s in the community. Yeah.
Yeah, both in the books they type, not as much, but books in the community, the diversity is really cool to see. Kind of like glean insights. I have a philosophy. I can learn something valuable from everybody. And it doesn't matter what their age or situation in life is. I found, like I told a story once. I learned tremendous amount from a little 6-year-old girl playing with her grandma and great grandma one day. It's just a kind of a life philosophical transforming moment for me. And I kind of find being in a community that way too. It's like I go into it that everybody knows more than I do, and I'm going to pick up something that I wouldn't know otherwise. So anyway, enough of that philosophy. Let's go to Jason. And Jason, you know, you got some tips to offer somebody new to the typing process, or something that you found really helpful to see SI when you're typing.
Well, I like that humility in that story you just told. I have a very similar philosophy that ultimately anyone can say anything and I can choose to learn from it or not. And whether they're an authority source or not, they might have something valuable to say. And I need to take it and think about it and work out whether or not I can use it or not. And so I try not to be too judgmental on where I get my information. Like I will use information that's good, but I need to work out that it is good information. So even if someone who is an authority source is spreading misinformation, it's not the end of the world, because it's like, well, I can just figure out this nonsense. Honestly, from anything extra to the stuff I've already said, like to say, like you were saying specifically, like smack bang, what is SI, to like identify like a surefire way. I don't really have any information on that. I haven't figured it out yet. Still working on it.
Yeah, that's fair. Would you say that at this point it's more your philosophy to look for SI or to look for not SI?
Looking for not SI is good. That's quite good. I tend to look for NE first, and then it's like, well, are they sensing or intuition? And to be honest, the coins I tend to struggle the most with is thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition. It's far easier for me to work out are they OE or OI, and then decider observer is also easier. But I struggle to see the difference between SI and NE, or SE and NI even. But like what I do notice is that I will probably get them on the right observer axis based on what SE is doing, or NI is doing, or NE or SI. Which is say that it's SE first, or NI first, or SI first, or NE first. That's a bit tricky. I feel like I had a spout of typing results where I get consistently like 7 or 8 coins, but I think that's within the realm of normal variability, and that some of it may have been luck. It's very possible. Some of it's just luck. You hear the right statement, your brain makes an association. Maybe it's the wrong association, but you get the right answer. Doesn't mean that you were correct.
Yeah, very fair.
I have
start moving to the summary, but before we do that, just any ad hoc, off the cuff, thought through, sleep process, whatever tips for SI that maybe we haven't covered.
Yeah, so So I have one that like a major one that is kind of the crux of like this is kind of like new information stuff that Dave and Shan haven't talked about, things that I use in my process that I think will be helpful for everyone who is engaged in the typing game. And it's this concept, the NI concept, that starts off at this area of like micro versus macroscopic observations. So I'm noticing SI is very good at like magnifying glass, like looking down, drilling deep, right? And NE is the best in the opposite spectrum, is like looking at the wide lens of possibilities. So the wide lens and the narrow lens. But what I'm saying is like use that to look at the microscopic and macroscopic ways to observe a person's type. And when it comes to SI, you have the sleep and the blast. SI shows up in both sleep and blast. So it could be SIFI sleep or SITI sleep. It could be SIFE blast or SITE blast, right? So this is what you want to see, is like you want to track the person's blast or sleep. And if you're picking up on it, it's like, hey, is this an SI sleep story? Is this an SI blast? Like, what kind of blast are they giving me? What kind of sleep story are they going through? And to contrast that, you can also see, like as Jason was saying, that any might be easier to spot. Then you look at their consume or their play. It's like, okay, when this person is finally consuming or playing, they're using NT consume or NT consume, NT consume or NF consume, or same for the plays, right? NT play or NF play, being like, whoa, this person is like really tripping me out. Like, oh man, like I had to, deal with all these crazy, fantasy world stuff. Like we're all of a sudden talking about Dune and the desert and the, you know, and Denis Villeneuve, the director guy, who's like NEFI, is like you just listen to that guy talk about his direction and his, and it gets into this really romantic NEFI lens. Highly recommend that dude for some good NF consume. And yeah, so that's the other side of that. But there's the quadras as well. So just as I just went through the animals, there's also, and these are kind of macroscopic patterns, right? Because you're kind of zooming out. Like on the other side of it, it's the coins, and it's like, hey, is this sensing? Is this OI over OE? That's a micro. And the macro is these things like the animals, and then also the quadras. So SI is present in the quadras of the alpha and the delta. So you guys are deltas. And so you can kind of, when you're watching a celebrity or someone and you realize that they're deltas or alphas, be like, hey, this is my opportunity to learn more about the SINE axis. And the opposite is like, hey, if I'm watching someone who happens to be in the beta or the gamma quadra, then I'm learning about the SENI axis. Going back to what Brian was saying, you could learn from everyone because you're going to learn about one axis or the other, and they're both worth learning about. So yeah, that's it. Is the animals and the quadras, those are kind of the macroscopic patterns that I'm benefiting from when typing. But yeah, like the micro stuff is important too, and that's like going over your definitions and your coins and replaying, like watching the person you already know. But yeah.
So Habib, one more curiosity I have here on that is, we're talking about the big picture and the detail processing and kind of combination hybrid approach. When you type, I offered my example. Like, okay, I'm just gonna throw out an intuitive guess, and then I'm gonna put the detailed meat on the bones as necessary to come to an answer. And then of course you could come at it the other way, where you like do all the discrete, granular components and try to triangulate and all this complicated stuff, and then try to put it into an NI box. How do you approach that? Do you have one? You obviously you're an NI user, so and you referenced the big picture. I imagine you do it closer. Not that I'm anywhere as close to you, but closer to the way I do it, where I just, here's the leader in the clubhouse guess, completely intuitive, off a very brief sample, and then only go into the details as necessary? Or do you do a balance?
So for me, like you have to work the machine you have, right? And so this is, there's so much more to us than the 512, but like just looking at the 512 for me, I have the SE. So anytime I get to the NI understanding or the pattern that I can finally share with the tribe. It's come from, all right, Habib, you've seen this 100 times. You've seen this, 500 times or something, right? Like by the time I'm sharing with you, it's like, all right, finally you're willing to share because you've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
It's because I've done all the like SE gathering of the data. And so I'm not really guessing. Like when I look at my guesses, they're not really guesses. It's because I've kind of looked at all the data. And this is, and it's okay. I don't need to be some, NI person who's like guessing out of my ass, like just and that's okay. I don't need to go in and pretend I know what I'm talking about with like, whatever random topic. But just leveraging that's how I'm getting to the big picture is through the data. So look at your data and start asking yourself the questions of like, what do I know by now? What should I be able to guess from all this data? I should be able to make some kind of extrapolation. I should be able to like come up with some kind of pattern. Let me guess. Let me try it out. Let me share with other people. Let me share my guesses with other people and see, that actually makes sense, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. But even at a certain point, like it's almost this like play last situation where it's like, wait, it doesn't matter if anyone says it or not. You've done so much data gathering. Sometimes, we've done so much SI and SE that it doesn't even matter if anyone validates it or not.
Yeah, I guess it depends on like, it's not really fair for me to even ask that question from my vantage point because you've done this tremendous amount of SE observation and you've got these NI clusters in your subconscious that are just super readily available. Kind of like I have a bunch of SI blastable nuggets in my subconscious that are just can come out on the spur of the moment. So in your case, you're kind of doing both, but you're resting on just huge number of reps that has these NI boxes, so to speak, in your subconscious, just ready for you to then you can maybe approach it by looking at the century first, looking at the small lips and these factors, and then your subconscious comes to the rescue and it all blends together, it sounds like.
Yeah, because I think for me as an SI, I guess I don't have enough faith in that approach, probably because I don't have enough sample set to work from and I don't know the different archetypes well enough. And I guess another thing is, so you mentioned about I've collected all this data and watched all the different videos. And sometimes that's where I get hung up on because I often feel like if I watched a different interview, they would have been in a different state and I would have had different data and I might have come to a very different conclusion. And sometimes that's why I'm way off is because I happen to watch the one interview I happen to watch was maybe not a typical state that they're in. Maybe they were peacocking and I don't have enough time to put many hours into it. So I mean, how do you remedy that? And how do you know good videos to watch when you don't know much about the person? And I just
there was a video
that
there's a video Dave did on predictability. And I think this is a huge one for sensing and intuition, just in general. Like we all here have done a lot of sensing, right? Intuition is about predicting. It's like being able to walk into a room. And I remember, Brian, there was some video you did where you shared about going into coffee shops and being able to kind of predict what's this person's like life story of like, hey, before I even talk to them, I'm guessing this is a quiet person. I'm guessing this person doesn't really talk to people and they'd be happy to share their life story. And that's a guess. And you're verifying that guess. And then, oh, that person's shy. It's like you're guessing that, hey, this person doesn't want to talk to you. So you're like, okay, maybe I won't. Or this person is showing signals. And those are all guesses. You're leveraging off of guesses and predictions in reality. So Laura, I think the thing missing from your process is, hey, as I'm making these guesses, like, can I check it with reality? Can I actually put some, skin in the game in that way of like, hey, I'm going to try this approach. I'm going to try to tweak my process here and kind of seeing if your guess is panning out.
Like when I'm typing somebody, make a guess. Like well, let's say that I'm guessing that they're an end savior. And because they're an end savior, I'm going to predict that they will do this. I will predict that when they explain something, they're going to use more analogies and they're not really going to concretely prove it. And then you listen to more of their video and you find out if that's really true or not.
Yeah, it's like I said they would leave the planet. I watched another clip and they didn't leave the planet.
Okay.
Oops. Okay, let me try it again. Up, they
Make
didn't leave the
predictions
planet
as you're
again.
watching.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
definitely
really
test your
like that
hypotheses.
expression. The leave the planet. I often have told, and I don't want to personalize this too much, but I've also often described my brain as a combination of woo out there and grounded solid at the same time. So that phraseology you use, off the planet, resonates with my own self-talk. But yeah, it's a good example of observing and typing and using that as a kind of a checklist point.
Mhm.
So before we move to Laura kind of closing us out here, Jason, Habib did quite a bit of elaboration there on that. Is there any kind of closing point on SI advice or tips?
Sure. It's going to be hard to add anything else to what I've said. All I can say as a tip is essentially like when you do make those guesses and you do write things down and you put a stamp on it and say, this is my name on it, I am committing to this idea. And let's say you've committed to a type for someone. The process of doing that is working your brain in a way to say, I'm now going to come to a head and narrow everything down and say, this is my guess. And then that process can be improved on every single time you do that. And so by forcing yourself to spit out results and to nail something down in reality, it does help you improve your ability to make guesses, to be more comfortable making wrong guesses, and to coalesce all the information in your brain and put it together. So that's a very valuable process, like when you're doing that. So just, yeah, you got to be comfortable making mistakes. You've got to be happy to be a fool, make mistakes, and eventually you get better and better until your guesses become spot on.
We're back to Hippo.
Oh yeah.
Back to Hippo.
Well,
Humility,
Hippo.
itten and
Yeah,
process.
that could be our mascot.
Because like for me, I've just got the one acronym, which is POO, process of outcome. It's not very sexy.
It's all
I
relative,
have
right?
one more really kind of quick question. Because sometimes I find when I'm watching Dave and Shan's video and they're like making some conclusion about something, it's like, okay, I mean, I understand where they're coming from, as I'm watching them do it, but it's like sometimes I watch that same video clip that they did, and I could watch that 20 times or more, and I would never come to the same conclusion that they did. And so it's like, Dave and Shannon make this insight, and it's like, how would I apply it to another person? Because I'm not going to see that exact same sensory again. They're not going to say the same thing. They don't have the same situation. Do you know what I'm kind of getting at? I mean, it's
Yeah.
It's
And this,
something like the fact humility, right? You just can't figure it out, even with explanations from others. Like Dr. Caroline Leaf, I referenced her before. It's like, how did they say she's got feminine sensory? I still don't understand it. I guess maybe there's some triangulation or cross-referencing or ruling something out. But when I watched her, I'm like, it's got to be feminine sensory. I mean, a masculine sensory.
Mhm.
And, there's things like that I guess, just kind of goes to the, I made reference in a little mini video I did recently about there's an arbiter of truth. And my philosophy is Shan's brain. But you have to have a reference point. You have to have a key, like a test in college, and everybody has to respect that in the game we're playing and try to navigate accordingly. And then sometimes you still might not get it. But
Well,
I think
it's kind of
Dave
like, for
said
example,
times,
I know Dave and Shan often say, well, this person is just doing a consume story. They're taking you along. And then, okay, maybe after I hear their explanation, okay, yeah, I could see why they think it's a consume story. Now, I may have watched that same clip. I wasn't getting that, inference at all. But then how can I apply this concept of consume story to somebody completely different. Obviously, they're not going to have the same consume story. They're going to have completely different sensory. So how am I going to be able to tell that that's a consume story? So that's kind of what I was.
And I think that's part of why we as
Maybe
SI,
because I'm demon in, so I don't we see that pattern. I'm dependent on, I know that, I know I depend too much on the sensory details, but
Yeah, I have a couple things
I
to
do
say
believe
that
anybody can become a good typer. That's pretty clear. There's some folks that have proven that. I just think that if you have too much SI, it can kind of work against you because you get into the details too much, and that'll work against you. And I know that happened for myself, and Jason and I have talked a little bit about that too.
Yeah.
Laura here is commenting on it, but it is what it is. It doesn't mean you can't overcome it and learn the tips, but it's just a watch area, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah, I think just to address that for a second, I think Brian, what you said is exactly right. That's great double observing. At the end of the day, it's going to be double observing. And also the SE, the way Dave and Jen are giving examples, it's kind of like TE, where it's take it or leave it. Like we all have TE, we all throw ideas out there. And SE is kind of like that. It's like, hey, I'm going to show you this example. Oh, that didn't work? Okay, move on, please. Please move on. That's the parentheses thing that they're not saying. Meaning, if this clip didn't work for you, do not watch it 20 times.
Yeah.
Watch it
times. Because sometimes I could watch a clip multiple times and I'm like, it's still not obvious. It's still like, well, yeah, if you say so, I'm still not seeing it. Or if I'm seeing it, it's not super obvious. It's definitely not the first thing that I would spot about that person. I'd probably make some other different kind of observation, but not that one.
Yeah, and something I'm like hoping for the community and just in general with OPS and typing is I hope that in the next 3 years or so that people on the SINE axis can come up with their own typing tips that help, because from what I've heard in the back channels of the community and stuff, like people who are on the SINE axis and they talk to each other about typing and typing tips, they're thriving, they're getting better, they're getting results.
Yeah.
So continue to do that and continue to work on that but it's not going to happen in 1 year. It's going to be like this process where we have to build up the Dave and Shan equivalent of the SINE explanation of because at the end of the day we do need the SINE friendly terms and definitions and things where like how can you narrow in on these more SI points. But yeah, and it's good also. I want to see people in the community like rise up and get results and share that.
Yeah, and have some people to point to. Isn't the Michael guy that they make reference to, isn't he SINE axis?
No, he's FISE.
Okay. Well, there's some folks I know in the type tournament that had SI or Century or something. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, there are a few good typers.
You mean that third
really
person that's typing with Dave and Shan now? I'm assuming that's what you mean, but are you talking about different?
Yeah, I was just looking for some examples for folks with SINE not to get discouraged, because I think the hurdle's pretty high to gain confidence and to do it, because it is an NI game. I mean, Dave and Shan have NI. I've gone on record saying I think it's all about emulating Shan's brain as much as possible, because both Dave and Michael refer to her as kind of like the lead person. But that doesn't mean you have to have a brain. That means you have to like develop your own methodology.
Do remember, I want to give
that
hope there, because Carl Jung, and as well as I believe Myers-Briggs, those people, they were on the SINE axis. So I do believe there is hope there. It just happens to be the NISE people, Dave and Shan are discovering and teaching it. But it's only a matter of time, I believe, for the future, the next Carl Jung to appear and and take things from there, at least with the SINE explanation or the centric approach. And yeah,
that's a possibility.
And any possibility, right, Jason?
Any possibility. It's possible.
The void in the universe will be filled by someone. Will it be you?
I hope
I've
so.
been looking at Jason. It's not going to be me, but Jason, I think he's doing the hard work.
Okay. Yeah.
Eventually.
Okay, so Laura, take
eventually.
us home.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you so much, Jason and Habib, for being guests and giving us your wonderful insights and tips in the typing process. So just to kind of summarize the key points, Brian came up with a great acronym called HIPPO. And this kind of summarizes the typing tips in a nutshell. So the H is for humility. So don't let this typing go to your head. You know, yeah, you may get the 512 right, but don't make too much of a big deal out of it. And also don't make too much of a big deal if you really mess it up. And then the second one is iteration, and that's the I's. So keep repeating by doing reps over time. That's how you get good at typing. The third one is process. You know, have a process for typing. It's really about refining the process over time and not so much how close you can get to the 512 type, because by refining your process, eventually you will get better results. And then the O is just, well, that's part of process orientation. So process orientation is the PO. So that's the HIPPO acronym. So
Yeah, and I think all the rest of the inputs, instead of SI summarizing everything, that kind of stands for the self of the viewer to listen. A lot of great insights and experience tips. So real thankful for you guys to join us on our little SI series here, as we're trying to help the community and ourselves to understand what SI is and isn't, both in life and in typing. So it's greatly appreciated you guys join us.
Yeah, thank
Well, I
you.
appreciate the work you guys are doing. Very good.
And just kind of give you a sneak peek of episode 6 of SI Lab. So we're going to be talking about SI sleep, and we're going to have SI sleep in all 4 of the positions. So lead SI sleep, second sleep, third sleep, and sleep last. And we'll be having 2 guests, Nathan Spinelli, who leads with ST sleep, and then we'll have Grace Owen Sparks, who has SI sleep second, and then I have sleep third, and Brian has sleep fourth. So stay tuned for that. So please subscribe to my channel if you want to see more SI Lab videos, or just more OP videos in general. Hit that bell for notifications. And thank you so much once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys and Laura.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.